Hi, everybody. Hi, Alex.
Hello.
Thanks for coming out today.
Hey, thanks a lot. It's so awesome to be home and to be at TechCrunch Disrupt at the same time. Fucking awesome.
Awesome. So, well, I thought we'd start off with something really casual. So, are you what the major record label executives see in their nightmares?
I hope not. Like, we work really closely with them, and we're in touch all the time. So, unless they have secret nightmares that I don't know anything about, then probably not.
But seriously, what is going on with the music industry? Do you see that the total euros earned is going to shrink because of technology, or is it just shifting?
I think it's just shifting. I think that basically, if you zoom out a little bit and you think about music in general, music and audio, it's something that it's unique in that it's relevant for every single person on the entire world. Very few products are something that's interesting for everybody in the entire world. So it's always going to be something really significant for humans. Then what happens is that the industry and sort of the economics and the markets around it will just shift over time. And I think like right now we're in a period of redefining, what different elements make up sort of the music industry and the music markets. And I think that people are maybe looking a little bit too narrowly about which dollars are or which euros are seen as being part of the music industry. I would include like gaming, people buying instruments, all kinds of stuff, everything related to how people engage in music. And, I think, for hundreds of years, people have been deeply engaged with music and audio. We will keep being that, and that means that we'll be able to create like large industries around it as well.
Do you see there being a big opportunity for startups to make money in the live music experience? Do you see euros earned being shifted towards that area?
Yeah, I mean, the live's been doing well for some time and keeps growing. I think it's like it's an area where I've seen more and more startups doing interesting things as well. I think that there's a lot to be done there, both in terms of making it easier for people to discover and go to gigs, making it easier for the creators and artists to be able to set up and play gigs. So yeah, there's a lot to be done there for sure.
We're seeing a big democratization of the music industry. Anyone can create music thanks to cheap software, cheaper instruments, sampling and remixing. How is that affecting the music business, and how should startups try to adapt to that?
It's badass. That's what it is. It's like, I think that
democratization is badass.
Democratization is badass. And accessibility is badass. So I think that I kind of came from a background of starting with music, not being very musical at all. I remember I bought a bass and I listened to Metallica and I tried to play it and I wrote down how you're supposed to play Metallica, and then I found that 2 years later and every single note was wrong. So I had no kind of musicality in me going into it, but I always loved the feeling of being able to create. To be able to create music is an incredibly sort of rewarding feeling. But the interfaces for creating music, the interface of a guitar, have been way too complicated for sort of the mass to be able to use them. So through kind of software, making it easier for people to participate in creating music is a huge shift for sort of humanity overall. Of allowing much more people to have that feeling of being able to create the music is massive. We're still kind of right at the starting point of it. It's still it's not everybody in this room has created a song, right? It's still a smaller kind of behavior, but it's getting there, and that it's becoming much simpler for people. And I think the two things that come out of that are really important, for the world in a way, is that more people get to have the feeling of what it's like to create in music, which is super important. The second piece is that I believe in that the more people you have creating, the more interesting kind of aggregate output you get. Yes, you'll get a lot of stuff that's created that's maybe not so good.
Like dubstep?
No comment. But you'll also find all of these nuggets within that, right? New forms of expression. I don't believe in this sort of old school notion of just give the tools of creating to like a very small set of people in the world, and they will create pure magic. Like I think like fuck it, distribute it as wide as possible, and you'll see super interesting things happening. Especially like when you look at a world today where like it's almost hard to think about sort of what a genre of music means these days, because it's been so like mashed up and cross-fed. I remember like 10 years ago, electronic music was like a genre in a way, and like even if people talk about EDM and stuff today, it's like you look at sort of a top 20 list and like everything's electronic music, and everything has kind of elements of hip hop, and like everything has kind of elements of pop in it. So yeah, I think we're in a fun place where a lot of people create and mash up stuff.
Well, you guys as SoundCloud are in a pretty good space. You just hit a really big milestone, right?
Yeah, which one do you want to talk about?
Let's talk about your growth first.
Yeah, so I mean, we've had a really good year. Like we've been growing very fast. We're lucky to really kind of be this like the defining audio platform of the web now. I mean, we're reaching over a 250 million people every single month.
Wow. So you're up to 250 million. You were at 200 million not too long ago.
Yeah, so it's like 250 million people reached across the entire world as well. I think that's kind of cool. It's like in a given hour, we'll reach almost every single country in the entire world. Actually, space as well. Like the first sound in space was like recorded and shared on SoundCloud, which is pretty neat. And yeah, people are uploading over 12 hours of audio every single minute. So it's like, pretty crazy scale, actually.
So you guys also just announced a brand new integration today, right?
Yes, yeah, we're just launching today, which is super fun. We've got a new integration with Instagram that will be coming out today. And it's very simple, but I'm pretty excited about it because I think it will be quite cool. It's basically just allowing creators to make use of their Instagram feed and take pictures from their Instagram feed and add that as artwork or the visual representation of the sound. Or like if you're creating a playlist of things, you can also then tap into your Instagram feed, pick one of your favorite images and choose that as the artwork. And I think what's kind of cool about that is that both like Instagram and SoundCloud are similar in ways that it's just like, it's large platforms for people to be able to share one specific content form and sort of connect with each other around that and be social around that form. But of course, as humans, we like audio and we like imagery and all these different kinds of creation. So I think this is just one of these things where it's like the internet. You just kind of like connect two things together and you get a very simple user experience, but you get to make use of both of them.
So the thing is, back in the day, being a musician meant writing music.
Yeah.
But nowadays, you have to do everything. You have to be a merchandise product designer. You have to be a photographer now. You have to be a community manager, a viral marketer. Like,
yeah.
What does that mean for being an artist? Is music as pure as it used to be?
Well, I think it depends. Like, you don't necessarily have to do all of those things today. You still see artists that are much more kind of introverted, much more reclusive, and then, they have sort of people around them helping out with more of the sort of outward-facing stuff. So I think that there's different models for different artists, but I think to a certain degree, it's kind of always been like that. That if you go back and look at some sort of great artists, it's not that they were, these complete like recluse introverts. Like they're usually fairly outward-facing, charismatic people. So I think that just translates into different behaviors today. And I think the ones where it worked really well is where they're not forcing it, where they're just doing it naturally, where they kind of they live on SoundCloud and on Twitter and on Tumblr very naturally, and it just sort of brings this feeling of authenticity to them.
Cool. So you relaunched your premium subscription options back in March. Normally you get 2 hours of music uploads, but now with these accounts you can get, for €3 a month, you get 4 hours of uploads, and for €9 you get unlimited uploads.
Yep.
How have those been selling?
They've been selling well.
I mean, like, well as in as well as you had hoped, better than you'd hoped?
They're actually pretty much like exactly on our forecast as what we'd expected. I think the big thing when we made that change was that we went from 4 different account levels with a fairly wide range of pricing to 2 levels with a much smaller range of pricing. So the primary reason for making that change was that we saw that we could simplify the accounts, make them cheaper and more accessible, yet still hit the previous forecast that we had.
So you're making as much money, but it's just easier and less complicated.
Yeah, so it works it works the same way for us as we forecasted revenue-wise, but we have a much more accessible product and a much more simpler product.
Would you recommend that to other startups that have premium subscription layers?
It depends. Like I was talking to somebody about this. Like there's all these like interesting things you can do with pricing strategies, right? Of like if you have multiple options, you basically get more kind of levers to tweak with. So if you're really only focused on that subscription piece, it might be a good idea to have several tiers to be able to play with it. But if you're focusing on a lot of other things at the same time, then I would definitely recommend simplifying it. So for us, for example, we wanted to simplify it because we've been very like heavily focused on growth and engagement, not as much focused on the revenue side. So we wanted to have that piece be as simple as possible, both for our users, but also for us as well.
All right, so I want to talk a little bit about your competitors right now, or at least other companies in the music space. I know everyone likes to say they don't pay any attention to their competitors. We're just straight laser focused on our own thing. But honestly, like, what do you think of iTunes? And if you could change something about that product, what would you change?
We actually don't like to look at competitors. We're just laser focused on our own things.
No, I'm not going to let you get away with that.
No, but I think that there's... So I think one thing that's maybe a little bit different for us is that we look a lot at what other companies in kind of adjacent spaces are doing, but we really honestly feel that there's not a direct competitor out there. I think it was quite similar for Twitter as well when they were sort of growing up. That if you approach it from the perspective of there's different services out there for listening to music and audio, yes, but there's no platform that's open in the way that SoundCloud is, where anybody can sign up or anybody can upload, and that reaches the kind of the scale across the web. So in that way, we really are unique. I kind of look at the video space a little bit as an analogy for it, where I kind of think of there's kind of 2 different approaches there. There's the evolutionary approach and there's the revolutionary approach. The evolutionary approach is what, say, a company like Netflix is doing. And I'm a big fan of Netflix and I use it a lot. They're great. But they're not that different from what we had a couple of years ago. It's kind of and they've said, they want to be like HBO basically. So they're kind of taking a existing model of the world and sort of through evolution taking that onto the internet. And then the flip side, you have a company, you have a service like YouTube, which for me is completely revolutionary in that it's not basing itself on a pre-existing media company or pre-existing tech company. It's basically taking its primary inspiration from the architecture of the internet and what you can do with the internet. And that's why they can reach 1 billion people, where they can have content that's never been thought of before, and just a whole different service. And I feel that that's quite similar today in the world of audio and music as well, where I feel that what we're doing is that we're trying to look at the fundamentals of the internet itself and say, what is it that we can do here that's completely different from before and that's really awesome? Then that is, for instance, that everybody can sign up and everybody can upload stuff and everybody can be part of it. People can comment on things. It's inherently social. It's not just like some other services where it's more about acquiring some content and reselling it, basically, which is more evolutionary.
I mean, I personally would like to see it be easier to upload music to things like Spotify or iTunes. I feel like I have a lot of friends who are musicians, and they use SoundCloud for that exact reason. And they, you know, a lot of their friends ask them, they're like, "Why isn't your music on Spotify?" And it's just a harder process for them. Would you think that it would make more sense for them to democratize a little bit and open up?
You have to ask them. I don't know.
All right. Well, in that case, you know, I want to talk a little bit about Berlin.
Yeah.
So could you explain the factors that contribute to Berlin's music scene being so fucking awesome?
I think that there's probably a combination of, like, Berlin has always been this place that wants to be doing things differently, and it's kind of edgy and decadent and punk and like do it your own way kind of thing. And I think that mentality, that just like attracts all these creative people. Like if a lot of artists are really into that mentality, basically. And then I think, like right now at the moment as well, you know, it's been a city that's had a lot of space. It's fairly cheap to be here as well, which also works well for artists. So that sort of decadence, edginess, the darkness of it, and cheap, that kind of like leads to a lot of fun art being created.
It's cool because when you talk about those factors, a lot of those actually make a lot of sense for startups wanting to be here as well. Like,
yeah,
are
totally.
startups the new art?
No, but there's huge amounts of creativity and artistic elements involved in creating a great startup, I think, and creating a great brand and creating a great experience for people. But I think that generally a startup has a bit more of a functional purpose than what I would think of normal art as. So, for instance, for SoundCloud, it's very, our reason for starting it is really that we believe that we can create a platform that impacts people in a really positive way. We believe that it impacts the world positively if people can connect with each other through audio and people can share their love of audio with each other. I think an artist would have a less functional purpose with what they would do. They would be exploring something different, but there's artistic elements to it.
Have you guys ever considered moving to the States?
Well, we have an office in San Francisco since 2 years, I think, and an office in New York since a couple of months. And like, for me personally, like I've kind of almost like given up on the idea of even like living in one place. So it's just kind of like a constant movement. So the U.S. is home as well in many ways for us, but the heart of the company has been and always will be here in Berlin.
There's still somewhat of, there's fewer startups here than in some other places. What do you think is the biggest barrier to getting great startups founded in Berlin or in Europe?
I don't think there is much of a barrier in Berlin anymore, to be honest. Like, there's certain things that are easier and certain things that are more difficult here, I would say. Like, it's still, clearly the case that there's not as much sort of like venture capital, like just right next door, if you're here. Like, the scene has gotten way better, and there's a ton of like angels and VCs around, and like, everybody's looking at Berlin, so all the big funds on Sand Hill Road and stuff, they're all looking at what's going on here, but it's still a little bit of a further of a distance than like if you're in Soma, for instance. But it's also like, I think that what's cool here is that you kind of, you sort of like can step a little bit outside of the tech bubble as well, and I think that it's really valuable for startups today to be close to this sort of like this urban and this sort of like artistic, creative scene as well. Because I think more and more what we're seeing at this phase of the evolution of the internet is basically that right now it's not just about pure technology innovation anymore, it's about being able to look at technology and innovation and put it in a real cultural context for that to really make sense for people. And I think to be able to do that, you want to be close to where culture is being created, which outside of obviously on SoundCloud is partly in Berlin.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Arrington yesterday was talking about how the city has sort of a beautiful, naive quality to it, where it's not as jaded and it doesn't feel like everything's sort of an echo chamber like it is in Silicon Valley.
Yep.
Do you think that startups that feel like they haven't found their innovation, you know, people who are thinking about pivoting, should they just move their offices like out of Silicon Valley and try to get a fresh perspective?
I think it would be helpful for a lot of people actually, because I mean, I think there's the sort of the echo chamber thing it's great in many ways because you have sort of the dissemination of information is extremely fast and you get this whole sort of system that moves very fast, but it also means that everybody's just thinking the same way and missing things along the way. So I think for a lot of people it could be quite inspiring to get out of that and sort of get back in touch with reality a little bit, and that may end up inspiring them a lot.
If there's, you know, you talked about there being a slight lack of funding here. Is there something that could be done to fix that? Like, should the German government be stepping in? Should more VCs be moving here? You know, what do you think could help make sure that there's enough funding going around?
Well, I think generally, like I'm not a big believer in sort of the government coming in and funding things. I'm sure there are examples where that's worked really well, but I feel like in many cases it doesn't necessarily work that well. There ends up being too much kind of like restrictions and too much overhead around it. The government, what they should be doing is just making sure that it's a healthy climate where people are incentivized to invest in other startups. That's sort of like what they should be doing, and then making sure that it's easy for people to set up companies and then hire people from wherever in the world they are, getting them into Berlin. So that's what they should be focusing on. For other VCs, I think it really comes down to like the startups here actually. Like it's their responsibility of showcasing themselves more in the world. Like VCs are very simple human beings in a way. Like they want to put like one in and then get some more than one out. Like they have a very simple sort of operating mind, right? So to get VCs to invest more in Berlin is just to show them that okay, they're going to make a lot of money if they invest here. So the government can do some parts. I think this is at least a lot of the ones I know are doing some of their part in that they're being much more observant of what's happening in the world. Like I remember just a couple of years ago, if I would talk to like valley funds, like everybody would be like, we're only investing like if you're in the valley. And I was like, okay, you're bad, like you're a mistake. And then you don't really hear that much anymore. Like you have all the big funds asking like what's going on in Berlin and other places in the world. So basically, I think it's in some ways up to the startups to kind of to show themselves to the world, build some cool shit, and have a lot of impact, and show people that it can be done from here.
Just succinctly, what parts of the music business do you think are ripe for investment or creation of startups right now?
I think that I don't know exactly how to do it, but I think that one area that is sort of evolving very fast, but there's a lot to be done, is around how creators of music and actually any kind of audio content, any content in extension, how they can associate themselves with different brands that fit them and get revenue through the brands that way. I think that there's been an over-focus on like selling units of stuff or even selling things through a subscription, whereas music is more popular than it's ever been. It's a core piece of like how we define our contemporary culture. Brands are all about wanting to be part of the culture that's being created right now, and you can't even think about being part of that culture without bringing music into the mix. And like the music artists are some of the strongest like ambassadors for cultural movements like in the world. And brands want to be part of that, but there's a lot of friction between how that happens. Like the JC Samsung thing was like very unique when it happened, right? And I think that can happen on a much larger scale, and not just with artists like JC, but on for smaller artists as well. And for me, what's nice about that model is that it really takes into the perspective of how things work at scale. Like you can do something like that and reach 1 billion people, which falls very in line with what the internet is good at. And I think that's why that piece is kind of interesting. I think in general, most people should be thinking in billions rather than millions, because we have the internet available, and that's sort of one of the cool things that it brings us.
That's great. So some of the things that just to recap, you talked about that you think that the revenue in music is shifting, it's not just shrinking, that democratization of access and creation is badass. You guys have hit 250 million users in terms of reach.
Yep.
And looking in the distance, you want to see more startups working with brands. And Berlin is a great place because it's got a new feel to it, and there's something different going on here than the Silicon Valley. It doesn't have the same echo chamber.
Yep.
But if you had one last piece of advice for a company trying to get into the music space, what would you tell them?
Try out our Instagram integration.
Oh, come on, no. Shameless plug is for the Samware brothers.
That
no,
one.
that's the Samware brothers plug. Tell me seriously. If I'm a young entrepreneur, I'm getting into the music business, what should I do or what should I avoid?
I would focus on what you can do. I would focus on two things. I would listen very closely to what the artists are saying, not to what the industry are saying. And I would focus on the areas where technology can really leverage behaviors, where you could see like how you could build something with technology that works for 1 billion people, and on the one hand, and then that have something like that that is something that resonates with what artists are saying. And if you find that thing, then forget everything else and just go for it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being a role model for startups in Europe and Berlin. You guys have done a great job.
Thanks.
Congratulations.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.